Imagine me and you, I do. I think about you day and night. It's only right to think about the girl you love and hold her tight.
Welcome to Crazy Carrot Studios. My name is James, and today we will be going over understanding game objects in Unity. Alright, here we are back in the project we created in our last video when we discussed the class, variables, and functions. Before we can start creating scripts to communicate with our game object in Unity, we first need to understand what exactly is a game object. A game object is just an object that represents characters, props, sceneries, etc. By themselves, they do not accomplish very much. In fact, at its root, a game object is just a container that holds the various components inside your game object. Now, let's create an empty game object for our scene. This is the most basic of game objects. In fact, the only thing it will have on it is the transform. You can do this by clicking the plus icon under the hierarchy, go to Create Empty, and you'll see here that it dropped out a game object right here with the transform over here in the inspector. The transform is the component that determines the position, rotation, and scale of the game object in world space. When you communicate with it, you will reference the components and give it direction for a vector 3. I will explain vector 3 in detail in the next video when we start to communicate with the game object. For now, let's dive into game objects a little bit more. Here in the top of the hierarchy, you will see a few basic game objects that came in when you loaded up. A main camera and a directional light. Let's dive into the main camera a little bit first. The main camera has 4 total components in here. The transform that we discussed earlier, which determines where the camera is located in the scene. Next, it has a camera component, an audio listener, and a script that communicates with the components. In essence, the script here is a component of the game object as well. Next, let's look at the directional light. You will notice it also has a transform, but it also has a light and a script of its own to communicate with the game objects. The difference between these two and the empty game object is nothing, but the components added to them. So if we were to go to the empty game object we created and add a light or a camera, and you can do so by going to the Add Component button, and you can either select a camera or type in for light, you can click on light. Or if you have a script that you want to create and add to it, we can go to New Script and you can create your scripts from here. For example, the transform component has 3 variables we can access: the position, the rotation, and scale. Each one of these is what we can manipulate through our own script to make the game object move, rotate, or scale based on the XYZ axis, which makes up a vector 3. Now, if you look in the scene view here, in the upper right hand corner you see this gizmo. This is the X, Y, and Z coordinates that corresponds with your position, rotation, and scale for the transform. Now, before we get started with creating the scripts to interact with this, let's kind of set up a basic scene with a few other game objects. So first thing I want to do is go ahead and create a plane, which is another form of game object. We're going to go to 3D objects under the create, and we're just going to hit plane. Now you notice here on the plane, you're going to have a few different components. These are called mesh renderers, a plane, a collider. These are different components that we will go into later on when we try to communicate with different ones. But for now, you're going to set the transform to 0, which it already is. If it's not set at 0, let's say the transform is somewhere else, you can just click in the 3 dots here and click reset, and it'll bring it back to zeros all the way across. Now, for this plane, I'm going to give it a scale factor of 10 and 10 on the Z. Now, the Y is going to be your up and down, but we're not going to see it. This is going to be our ground. So I'm going to retitle this by right-clicking, renaming to ground. You will also see in the inspector, it changed its name here, which is another place you could change it if you didn't want to go into the hierarchy. Now let's learn how to create a material real quick. we're going to go and create a folder for materials. And inside this folder, we're going to create, right click, go up to the top, create, and go down here till you see materials. From here, we're just going to call this one ground. Now you can change the color on this to whatever you'd like. For me, I'm just going to kind of represent it as something like a grass or something like that. So we'll just throw some green in there. And that's going to be in your surface input. I just changed the color there. And we're just going to drag that straight to here. You'll notice that it turns green. Or I can bring it to the game object itself and just drop it on there. Now what that's going to do, it's going to add the ground material as a component to it as well. Next thing we need to do is set up a cube that we're going to be working with in the next episode to have it move around. And for that, we're going to create a 3D object called cube. Now you will notice based on the cube's position at 0, 0, 0, it fits halfway between the ground and under the ground. And that's because it is set at a world, Unity's measurement is 1 meter squared. So in order for this to be exactly 0, 0, it's going to have half of that meter above and half the meter below. So we are going to take this position and go up 0.5. Now that's the y-axis, and you notice on the y-axis you have your green arrows here. That's showing the up and down value. So if we were to go negative there, you would see it would go the actual opposite way of the transform that you're seeing here. So let's just show you how that's going to look by going negative. And you see it does exactly the opposite. So if you were going to rotate or move, you're doing basically the same thing. Through script is you're going to change and edit this value to get it to where you want it. In this particular case, we're going to set it for 0.5. Now, I'm also going to put a little color on this one as well. So I'm going to create another material. And I'm just going to call this yellow. And let's go ahead and create a yellow here. And now I can just drag that straight into my character. So now that when we start to maneuver everything around, you have a clear visual of what we're going to be looking at. Now, notice here on the cube, if we were to set it right here in these little grid spaces, it fits it exactly. That's because our grid is also 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter all the way across. So let's go ahead and reset this to 0. Move that back to 0.5. And that will be what we're going to start manipulating in our scripts on the next episode. And from all of us at Crazy Carrot Studios, we would like to say thank you. And don't forget to please like and subscribe. We will see you next time when we get back to Learning with Bob.
The sky